Hello and welcome to episode 19 of the Ecuador Insider Podcast. I am Jesse Bayer, joined as always by Darnell Dunn. We are the co-founders and managing partners of Abundant Living Ecuador. Another spectacular day here in Loja, Ecuador, although coming to you at night here on May 1st, 2016. May Day, and the rent is due, my friend. We are a real estate and relocation services firm based out of Loja, Ecuador. You can reach us on our toll-free line from the U.S. and Canada at 888-999-0948. You can visit us at our website, abecuador.com. That's A as in Apple, B as in boy, ecuador.com. You can, of course, reach us by email, info@abecuador.com. And I just want to say, if wherever you're listening to the show, whether it's on Podbean or iTunes or YouTube, do us a favor, rate, subscribe. Help us grow the podcast, get the message out. Wanted to mention today to start the show, we got a lot for you today. This is the first show that we've done post earthquake, so we'll certainly update all things earthquake related. A lot of interesting policy changes that have come out since the earthquake. So we'll certainly talk about that. We'll talk about some new properties that have come along and give you, general updates on Ecuador and some of the goings-ons in the world. Before we get started on that, I wanted to mention or plug, I should say, our real estate tour. I have to say, this real estate tour, it's the best option out there in Ecuador for seeing the country and seeing the real estate market. We're the only tour that does both, and that's kind of one of the reasons we started the tour. We're the only tour that offers both everything you would want as far as seeing the country, but also the real estate market. And we've talked about this before. I won't talk about it too long, but we're excited about it, and we think it is a tremendous opportunity to both see Ecuador, see the real estate market, and just get all your questions answered. So you can sign up for that at abectour.com. That's abectour.com. It's $2,000 for a group tour for a single, $2,500 with the extension. For an individual tour, it's $3,500 or $4,000 with an extension for a single. Tack on $500 if you're coming with a spouse. 10 days. There's a 3-day coastal extension. We show you what we think is the best part of Ecuador. You get all the food stuff, all the cultural stuff. You get presentations on banking. You get investing, visas, the whole nine. You see the country. You get a sense of the markets, and you see quite a lot of real estate. It's really cool too if you're on an individual tour. If you're just interested in one area, like you want to do a 10-day tour of, let's say, the Orient, we can do the entire Orient in 10 days, and you can see, every cool little town there is, all the way from close to the border of Peru to close to the border of Colombia through the Orient, which is a really cool area. Or, for example, if you're interested more in the Sierras and you want to see, the Cuenca area and the Loja area and the 3 hours in every direction surrounding them. And we can tailor it to your needs if you're on a individual tour, which I think is also really cool option and something, a cool feature about the tour. Additionally, our relocation services is ready to rock. You can find that at ecrelocation.com. And, that's a product we set up for people who are moving to Ecuador but don't want to go through all of the hassles associated with a move to a foreign country, potentially in a language that you don't speak, certainly in a culture you're probably not familiar with. So, we set up a all-encompassing service that allows you to move here really, really easily and really smoothly and flawlessly and what are those adjectives? I never learned that in school. Whatever other adjectives you want to put on it. So, we help you with everything from visa to banking to temporary housing to getting your things here to real estate related projects or professional contacts, personal contacts, etc. So that's a really cool service and allows you to move here hassle free. What's the price tag we got on that? I forget. I'm gonna look it up. You remember?
I don't remember off the top of my head. No. If I'm not mistaken, it's $2,500. But let's double check that.
I just clicked the buy now button, as you all should be doing.
Buy. As our friend Jim Cramer would say.
Right. Yeah, $2,500. So moving on. Price reductions, new properties, some really cool couple of cool properties we're gonna hit on. And the first is a price reduction to really ridiculous levels at this point. Basically, the seller has to leave, and he's dropped the price. What did he start at? 120 or something like that?
Something like that.
He's dropped the price now to $80,000. It's in Vilcabamba. It's about 10 minutes or so from the town. It's a lot in a little development that's been done there. The lot is 5,200, just over 5,200 meters. So a decent sized lot.
Over half a hectare.
Over half a hectare.
So in acres, that's 1.3 or 1.28 to be exact.
Right. And it has
learning my metric system very well.
You are. And it has a house on it. I mean, a relatively nice house, small, simple house, but relatively nice. And it's got nice views, and all your services are there: electricity, water, etc. For 80 G's. So I mean,
2-bedroom, 1 bath, fireplace, really nice open floor plan, good finishing materials, and just a big lot that you can do a lot with, whether you want to build more, put in a swimming pool, put in a garden, or all the above, really. And at that price, which is negotiable, we have a very motivated seller who has some, who just needs to leave the country, as Jesse was saying. So all the information is on our MLS page. You can also find the listing on Plusvalia, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Or just contact us, and we'd be happy to set up a viewing and help you make an offer.
And then another property, which we just put out a property alert on. You won't find it on the website, but it's something we can show. Really a spectacular property. We were actually considering purchasing it to do a small project, but decided to continue our search for a property to do that on, because it was just not quite set up the way we wanted for what we were looking to do. But as far as a property, it's the kind of property that has the features that everybody is looking for who's coming to Ecuador. So it's about 15 minutes from Loja. It's approximately 70 hectares, so a really large finca. If you're looking for water, it's you won't find anything better. There's water all over, pure water pouring right out of the mountains. There's, at the very least 6 streams inside the property, bordered by a small river. Just an incredible property. Views, flat. I mean, there's 8+ home sites, flat parts all over, varied terrain. So if you want to be in the woods, you can be in the woods. You want to be by the water, you can be by the water. For agriculture, it's exceptional. For if you want to build high up on the land, which there's some incredible home sites, you can take advantage of the views. You're close to the city. Just really a remarkable property, and offering it at $218,000, so fairly reasonable as well.
The other thing that I really like about it, and something that I think people who are going to be attracted to it for the reasons that you mentioned, Jesse, is the fact that it's never been cultivated. There's a farm that was used for grazing cattle, and so nobody has ever cultivated. No one's ever put pesticides in the land. The land is ready to be cultivated in an organic fashion.
I mean, the air quality out there is insane. I mean, I was out there the other day grabbing some pictures and just breathing the air. It's right next to podocarpus, so you're surrounded basically on a couple of sides by podocarpus.
And native forest as well.
Yeah, and native forest. And, we were drinking right out of the streams. The water tastes incredible. You just feel great when you're out there. It's a property I would love to own, just an amazing finca. And fairly rare to have that much land, that much flat, that much water, that close to Loja. And for a very reasonable price. I mean, you could get it, it's asking $218. It's negotiable. I know the owner won't drop the price too much from there, but right around $200,000, you could, have an incredible property right outside of Loja.
Yeah, motivated seller as well too. He needs to leave the country. His wife recently got a job in Mexico, so she's gone ahead, and he's in a situation where, he knows what the property's worth, but if somebody were to come along with the right offer, I think it'd be a very smooth sales process.
Yeah, and that's the kind of property too that if you wanted to recoup some of your investment, you could split it up and make 2 properties out of it, sell a big piece, and get more than half what you paid back in that sale, potentially even almost all of what you paid for in that sale. And that just goes back to kind of the way land is valued here. The larger the property, the less the value per square meter or per hectare, obviously. But it's really extreme the way that happens. So you can get 1 or 2 or 3 hectares often for the same price. You can get 30 or 40 or 50 or 80. So very interesting that way, and certainly something to be taken advantage of if you're thinking about buying big properties, chopping them up and selling pieces. You can do well that way. So those a couple of new properties we wanted to mention. Couple of new blogs as well on the site, and that kind of leads us into some of the earthquake stuff. But go check out the 2 blogs. One is on one is called "Considering Options in Light of the Recent Earthquake," and that gets into a bunch of stuff, including where is dangerous to live as far as both earthquakes and other things, but specifically earthquakes. Why we're in this part of Ecuador. We may talk about some of this stuff a little later in the show, but that's an interesting read, and there's some interesting links to some articles that give you a lot of information if you're interested in subjects such as safety surrounding earthquakes, etc. The other one is Darnell penned on checking out the coast post-earthquake, and that's also an interesting read because he last week took a trip basically from Guayaquil to a bit north of Olón. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
And saw the whole coast up until north of Olón. So that's an interesting read, and I'm sure Darnell will share some of his insights in this podcast as far as what he saw. But just interesting to note that the earthquake epicenter, which was further north in Muisne and Esmeraldas, seems to be fairly compact. Certainly didn't get very far south because Darnell saw no damage anywhere on the coast from Guayaquil to north of Olón. So check those out. Let's jump into the earthquake. So, as probably all of you or most of you listening to this are aware, Ecuador suffered a 7.8 on the Richter scale earthquake. I forget the date now. I don't have it in front of me.
April 16th.
April 16th.
Last Saturday.
Okay. So,
or 2 Saturdays ago, I'm sorry. Yeah, because it's the first day.
2 weeks ago. Yeah. So, a lot of damage. It was in Muisne in Esmeraldas, the province of Esmeraldas. Some towns got hit really hard. So Puerto Viejo in particular, I think maybe got the worst of it from what I've read and seen. Certainly any building that went up in the immediate area that wasn't built properly is no longer standing. A lot of damage to a lot of poorly constructed buildings. Interestingly enough, well-constructed buildings it seems had no damage. One of the things that Darnell talks about in that blog post is 2 properties that we signed recently in what town?
In Crucita, it's called.
Right. In Crucita, which is how far from Muisne, would you say?
From Muisne, it's probably maybe 40 miles or so.
Okay. So, certainly in the vicinity.
Yeah.
And there may have been I think we were.
Well, actually, it's right next to Puerto Viejo, which was basically destroyed.
Right. And
it's in the same canton. So, it's maybe 15 minutes away. Right on the beach, no damage at all. When you go to Puerto Viejo, it might be the most damaged city in the entire country after the earthquake. And that's the capital of the province of Manabí. So, they specifically what they did is they built their foundation 3 meters deep, or about 10.5 feet, give or take, of reinforced concrete, and no damage there. Very close to the epicenter.
And I think I was looking at an email you forwarded me from those sellers. It sounded like the town wasn't damaged at all either, even being that close to the epicenter.
Yeah, very little damage, no loss of life. The infrastructure is still intact.
So very interesting the way that happened. Certainly there were deaths. It's hard to know at this point what the final number would be. We're over 600 at this point. There's estimates as high as 3,000 as far as when they find all the bodies. Hard to say, but certainly there's been loss of life, injuries, lots of people, and people in the thousands still missing. Perhaps 2,000 or so still missing. So, tragic event, certainly, and Manabí province, at least parts of it were hit fairly hard. We felt it here in Loja. I was sitting on my couch, and first, actual kind of significant earthquake that I had ever felt in my life, being from the East Coast of the States. We don't get earthquakes there. It made me feel drunk. I felt like I lost my equilibrium. And then my window shades started whacking against the window, and I thought the cats were playing with them. So I went over to look, and then I realized I felt drunk, and B, all my window shades were whacking against it. So I was like, oh my God, earthquake. So we felt it a little bit, but no damage whatsoever in this region at all.
I was sitting at my desk in the office getting some work done. And at first, this was the first significant earthquake I ever felt as well. And I'm sitting at the desk, and then all of a sudden I'm feeling really dizzy. I'm like, what's going on? I'm thinking I'm having heart palpitations or something.
Right.
And then there's Jesse's desk or office is right in front of mine. And then in front of his office are 3 plants that we have, and they're all in stainless steel plant holders. And those start rocking back and forth on our tile floor, and I'm like, oh, this is an earthquake. And then I went and stood under one of those weight-bearing pillars next to a door frame. I'd seen that on TV somewhere. It's like something you do in an earthquake. And that was it. Kind of surprising. Never experienced an earthquake, as I mentioned before, but no damage here.
And, interesting too. I mean, we settled on Loja in part for safety reasons. There are no major fault lines anywhere in this area. But Ecuador, well, really, the entire, Ring of Fire and the entire really Pacific coast of the world basically is, a seismically active zone. But we're in the Andes Mountains, so we're, very far inland. We're in basically the second safest seismic zone in Ecuador outside of the Orient, basically the Amazon jungle, which is the least likely to have any earthquake. But, partly we're here for those reasons. Interesting that we did have an earthquake, which, talking to people, they say never happens. But I mean, we're in we're kind of in that period. The earth is going through changes. There are those kinds of things going on in the world, certainly at an increasing rate. And we feel like, for earthquakes, volcanoes, nuclear energy facilities, any sort of thing like that you can think of, we are in what I consider really to be the best place in the world, which is, played a factor in us being here. Again, go read those blogs. You can read about that. It also has a link to this article, which I think is really interesting, called the title of is Saturday Quake Devastates Coastal Areas, but How Vulnerable is the Rest of Ecuador? And that's in Cuenca High Life. You can, I'm sure, Google that as well and find it. You can also find it on our Facebook page, which I encourage you to visit and follow. And like, right? And but they talk to some scientists and some experts in this field, and Cuenca as well is pretty low risk place. Loja is a low risk place in Ecuador, and interestingly enough, the area that the earthquake hit is the highest risk area in the country. So not a huge surprise that they would have an earthquake there. It's one of the reasons, for example, we didn't settle on the coast, because there is that risk, at least more so in the northern coast, which is where this happened. But Quito is has some risk as well, much more so than where we are. They also have the volcanoes in the north of the country. So interesting from that perspective. If you're looking to get away from some of those things, the southern Andes are good. The Amazon is excellent, which is we also have. We're right on the border between mountains, the Sierra, what they call them, and the Oriente, which is the Amazon. So, yeah, anything else on the earthquake specifically?
Yeah, I guess I can get into my trip a little bit.
Yeah, please.
So it was really interesting because I had had a conversation recently with a good friend of mine who's a lawyer in Guayaquil, and I was checking in with him about something totally different, and then he asked me, when are you guys planning on expanding to the coast? I've got all these clients that would really be interested in what you guys are doing and working with you. And I had, at that point, we had just signed those 2 properties right outside of Manta. And I said, okay, well, it's funny that you ask, we recently signed some properties there. I'd be open to checking some things out. And he said, well, let me make some calls. When can you come? So I had scheduled it for Friday.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, it's scheduled to go down there last Friday, but this was before the earthquake. And so after the earthquake, the first thing, after I finished, answering all the people who had reached out to me about, my safety after the earthquake. I mean, people heard about it from outside of the country before I did. I didn't hear about it until I, started to Google it because, I knew obviously I experienced it, but I just meant the damage. Because we didn't experience any here. And so, I checked in with him, obviously, first to find out if he was safe. I just assumed that the trip had been canceled. I had heard that some things had happened in Guayaquil. From what I saw when I went there and from talking to my friend that lives there, the damage was maybe overreported or just not as widespread as one would have been led to believe from reading the news stories. So, I called him to see if he was okay. He was, and obviously his family is good as well, too. And he, asked me, are we still going this weekend? I said, oh, how is everything? How are the roads? Because I'd heard that there was a lot of damage to the infrastructure there and was really concerned about it, given that we had just, signed these 2 properties on the coast and are committed to selling them. And so he said, no, that's not an issue. I had been up that way, and if you can make it, let's go. So I didn't want to break the appointment. I was kind of hesitant about it and kind of feeling like he was just telling me what I wanted to hear, or just telling me that I should do it because he had already made the commitment. But I felt obligated to go, and so I went through with the trip, and I was pleasantly surprised. There was no damage where we went. I talked to some real estate agents out that way, seen lots of different really interesting properties, and the southern coast seems like it has less risk than the northern coast. If you're talking about a place that experiences a 7.8 on the Richter scale earthquake, less than 100 miles away, and there's no damage to speak of, that seems to me is a place that shouldn't be ruled out altogether as a place to live or to have a second home. So we're entertaining looking at some other properties out that way, and we may be signing them in the not too distant future.
And I know it was just interesting hearing from you when you got back, just that you literally just didn't see any damage.
No, not at all. Like, not one thing.
How far, you probably don't know off the top of your head, but do you have an idea how far, like the furthest north you went? So I don't know, how far past Olón did you go?
I went probably about 20 minutes to a half an hour past Olón. So you're talking about 15 to 25 miles away from the border with Manabí.
Okay. And then how far then do you think to Muisne? Any idea just off your top of your head?
I would say maybe 150 miles.
Right.
Give or take.
Relatively
not
close,
far.
and didn't see anything as far north as you got.
And that's the other thing about the coast too, is it's very flat. It's not like it's going to take you a long time to get from one point to the other on a road like that.
Yeah, and the coast is essentially all flat. It gets into the mountains very quickly as you go inland, but almost the entire coast is flat.
Right. And some parts of the interior of Manabí are a little hilly as well.
Yeah.
Not mountainous, but, rolling hills.
Right. Okay. Good stuff. So did you get to go swimming while you were down there?
I didn't. It was a very quick turnaround, unfortunately. I would have liked to spend more time there. But I think with these properties that we're looking at this point, I'll have the opportunity to go out there in the not too distant future, and we'll definitely take advantage of it.
Darnell doesn't take a lot of time off. Well, that brings us to kind of what the government has then done with the earthquake. So very interesting sort of developments and reactions, I would put that word in quotes, to the earthquake. And I think it's interesting to step back and look at the context that the earthquake happened in. So, Ecuador has a severely negative GDP. We'll have a severely negative GDP in 2016. We've got rising unemployment. Low oil prices is really the driver behind those facts. Government has lost a major source of revenue with oil prices. They're seeking to fill those budget gaps by raising taxes, raising fees. All your hidden taxes stuff are going up through the roof. Just to give a quick anecdote on that, I was at the Municipio late last week, and we had to buy a piece of paper. And I'm not even going to go down that road, but we had to buy a piece of paper from the Municipio in order to. The Municipio is like the like City Hall. I don't know what is the equivalent. Yeah. And we had to buy a piece of paper, myself and somebody who we work with, who works for an attorney who we work with here, in order to submit a petition. I don't know, what's a solicitud in English?
The solicitud is like a shoot.
Anyways, I mean, however, that's why I'm like talking like this, because I'm thinking of all these words in Spanish and I don't know their exact translation. But anyways,
it's like a petition, I guess.
Yeah, that's what I said.
Yeah. Oh, you did.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, maybe like a petition. Yeah. Anyways, we had to buy
like a request.
A request, right? No, we had to fill out forms basically, but we had to pay for the forms before we filled them out. So we had to buy the piece of paper, and the piece of paper was $2.10. And of course, that's a small number. Nobody would get up in arms about that, certainly coming from, elsewhere. But the person I was with was commenting to me that just last year, that piece of paper was 50 cents. And that's really indicative of what the government has done here surrounding taxes and fees. And we're not going to get into that deeply, I don't think, right now. We've talked about that a lot in the past. We want to get to this, specifics of some of these major policy implications that have taken place recently. But that's just the environment we're in. So in that environment, this 7.8 earthquake takes place. It devastates, at least one, small city, and certainly hits some other towns pretty hard.
Yeah. I mean, Puerto Viejo is the 6th or 7th most populous city in the country,
which by international standards is still a small city, but yes, for Ecuador, yes, like a decent sized city. Yeah. I mean, where's Loja on that list?
Loja is number 9.
So bigger than Loja.
Yeah, bigger than Loja.
Okay.
And bigger than Manta as well.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That's surprising.
I mean, they're very close. I mean, it's not a big difference, but it is. It has more
I had
people.
No idea. That's very interesting. Manta feels like a bigger city when you're in it than Puerto Viejo, but I guess Puerto Viejo is just larger geographically, must be. Anyhow, so that's the environment. 7.8 hits, devastates a certain area on the coast, and now we've got an estimates ranging from like 3 to 5 billion in reconstruction costs. So what does the government do?
I wonder how much of that is interest. On top of interest, on top of interest.
Right. Well, I mean, how much of that is just going into, private jets and nice dinners and bottles of, Johnny Walker Black. But anyhow, so immediately all of these tax proposals get implemented, and most of them were stuff that had already been proposed prior to the earthquake. So for a couple of weeks earlier, the president had made some tax proposals, which of course only means increases in taxes, and he wanted to increase basically sin taxes, cigarettes and alcohol. He wanted to, and I think we talked about some of this last week.
Yeah, we did.
He wanted to put a tax on physical cash leaving the country over like $1,100 or so. Excuse me. And so he then implemented all of that stuff because he wasn't able to implement them prior. Like he had proposed them, but there had been a lot of backlash and they were on hold. Earthquake strikes, boom, they're right through under the banner of helping the earthquake victims. Then there's a whole additional round of taxes. He raises the value-added tax from 12 to 14%. Very interesting in the light of his 2006 campaign promise to lower it from 12 to 10. He's now raised it to 14.
And keep in mind that they're saying that these are just one-year tax increases. But show me any government in the world that's put in a one-year tax increase.
Yeah, right. And actually like allowed it to expire. And I mean, it has happened, of course, but
I mean, they didn't, they renewed the salvaguardias taxes. That was just to give you guys some context, those were some import taxes that they had put into place last year that were supposed to be for 15 months to combat low oil prices. Because here in Ecuador, Ecuador uses the US dollar as legal tender, and the countries surrounding it use their own currency. And as the US dollar has risen, partly because of low oil prices, given the idea that the US will grow much faster, given the fact that oil prices are low, that the dollar has risen very significantly against currencies like the Peruvian Nueva Sol and the Colombian peso, two countries that border Ecuador. And so
herd exports.
Herd exports, and so they needed to combat that by doing raising taxes. So
right. So all of those taxes go through, and then he raises the IVA. He puts basically a 1% tax on wealthy Ecuadorians.
Which I don't know. I don't understand how that's levied, but yeah, I was unclear about how it is.
I was trying to figure that out also.
I don't know how but it's a net wealth tax. I mean, net wealth tax, not a net worth. That's net wealth. A net worth tax if you are worth more than $1 million. Right? And I don't know how they do it. I mean, they must do it with property, and they probably use municipal valuations for that.
God,
so if you have more than $1 million in assets,
if you own anything, because the municipal is going to say your $200,000 property is worth $3 million,
right?
Therefore, you're rich.
So you pay a 0.9% tax on wealth. That's a one-time fee, and because we're all about solidarity here in Ecuador, everyone has to share the burden. And so if you make over $1,000 a month, you're giving the government in taxes 1 day's pay.
That's another measure that he put into law.
Yeah. If it's over $2,000, it's 2 days pay, up into $5,000 where it's 5 days pay over a 5-month period. 4,000 would be 1 day's pay over a 4-month period, and so on.
Right, and of course, this money all goes into the black hole that is government, and they do whatever they want with it in the name of helping earthquake victims.
They're also, interestingly enough, doing their part to contribute to the effort by
that's well said.
Because we're all sharing in the burden, right? So they're also selling assets, and taking loans from the IMF. Similar to another campaign promise, maybe you remember this a little bit better than I do. What was he saying about the IMF?
They're the devil, according to Correa. So,
which is true, but...
Well, it is true. It is true. But so is Correa. They're all the devil. The government and the IMF are both the devil. But yes, he campaigned specifically against the IMF.
And defaulted on loans
and then he
as well.
Stuck them for loans, right? So... they're evil. They're the devil. I think he's literally called them like evil or the devil or something like that. And he's now going to them for loans.
Minor setback for a major comeback, baby.
Yeah, but that's just all this stuff is just a show.
It's theater, but they just got him with the reach around. It's like, he's against the IMF and the powers that be, and he's standing up for Ecuador, and so he defaults on one loan. And then, comes back around for a much bigger one. And this package of selling assets includes the hydroelectric dams that they had taken a loan from China to build in 2010
and
or 2011.
These are high-interest loans, by the way.
6.9%, I think, was the lowest.
And then they're high-interest loans that are then also have as part of the deals, which, mind you, the Ecuadorian government does not disclose the terms that they borrow money from China, for example. But anyways, they're high interest loans, and they also provide China the rights to natural resources in Ecuador on top of the interest, which of course Ecuador can never repay.
Right. And so they there's an interesting article that I wanted to touch on here. It is from let's see, let me see if I have the source here.
Just while you're looking that up, that's very, very much similar to, his whole thing, which we touched on last week about not drilling in the Amazon and then subsequently drilling in the Amazon because, the big bad oil companies are also evil, which they are. But he also, so they're evil. The miners are evil as well. So he closed down all the mines. They're back, but private Ecuadorians can't mine. But China can, and multinationals can, and he's drilling in the rainforest, and and Darnell will jump into this now, but it ties into the point you're making here.
Right. Yeah. So this was from. Okay, so this is the first article from hydroworld.com. This is from October 20th, 2011, titled China Provides Funding for Ecuador's 487.8 megawatt hydroelectric dam. The government of Ecuador has signed a credit agreement providing $571 million from the China Export-Import Bank to build and equip the Sopladora, something like that, hydroelectric project in Ecuador. Ecuador State Hydroelectric Generator awarded a contract in 2010 to a consortium of China to build and commission the hydroelectric plant on the Paute River in Azuay and Marona, Santiago provinces. The credit agreement signed October 17th in China brings financing to 100% at 672.1 million. The state-run news service El Ciudadano reported. Part of the Paute hydroelectric complex is to have no dam, but to utilize the water discharged by the 1,075 megawatt Paute project, together with the 162.6 megawatt Mazar project that was inaugurated in January and planned. It's another Spanish word I'm having a hard time pronouncing, but another plant. The projects are optimized to use the Paute River's hydro potential. A Chinese firm signed the contract to build the one of the other plants. So overall, I think the takeaway from this is that you've got not only are they financing the projects, but their Chinese companies are building them. So the benefit to the Ecuadorian people, quote unquote, for these kinds of deals is minimal at best. They've also gone about, there's an ordinance across the country. I guess you wouldn't call it an ordinance because that's municipal. But I guess, I don't know if it's a law or something like that, but they're requiring people at the municipal level, but this is a national directive, maybe that's a better way of saying it, that you have to switch over your electricity from 110 volts to 220 volts. And apparently that is more compatible with the hydroelectric dams. And they've been talking about how they're going to invest the funds in these kinds of projects because it's a public good, and that ultimately it's going to save the government and subsequently the people of Ecuador money if they invest in these projects. And the president, and I was actually looking for the source for this, had come out and said that, had defended his use of spending Social Security funds on these kinds of projects because it's really a savings in the long run. And he used some kind of term like social investment or some other sort of newspeak, liberal Orwellian
double speak.
Exactly. The funniest thing about this is now these dams are some of the assets that the state is going to sell. So after they've taken the Social Security funds from the people to invest in these projects that they're supposedly going to get a return on, Now there goes that return.
So let me get this straight. They raise taxes, they create a social security fund, then they steal the money, use it for hydroelectric dams, among other things. Then they take a loan from China at high interest, also then agree to allow them to use natural resources within Ecuador as part of the agreement to the loan. Then they owe China the money still, of course, for those projects, but they sell them to the public as something that's going to save people money and help Ecuador. And then they ultimately pay, and then they, of course, pay Chinese companies to do the work. So it's actually China, that money is getting borrowed from China and then going back to China to do the work for these projects. And then they take the actual finished product of the project and then sell it to China. Yeah. While still owing them the money on the loan, still having stolen the money from Social Security, and now the project is private. So the whole savings idea that they use to sell this to the public is out the window.
Exactly. Because who ends up paying, who are the Ecuadorian people paying for the electricity? China.
Right. So defend that, statists. But no, that's fascinating. And then you had...
another thing too. Another state asset that's very interesting. You know how they were talking about Tame now, losing all this money.
They may be selling it, right?
To China.
Right. Well, of course.
These assets.
If you've been listening to this podcast, we've been telling you that China is going to take over Ecuador and all these other countries for, a couple of, we've been talking about it for many more years than that. But since this podcast started, so we're just seeing the results of, what we already knew was taking place now.
Another interesting thing in this article from Cuenca High Life about this, because that was another article. I wanted to read the first article just to give you some background about where the financing came from to do the dam. Now, this is an article that came out today from Cuenca High Life titled "Government to Sell Assets, Including New Hydroelectric Plant Near Cuenca to Pay for Coastal Reconstruction." One of the other assets that they're considering selling is the government's phone company, CNT.
Selling a stake or something, yeah.
A public-private partnership, they've called it.
Right. You got to love those.
And what's very interesting about that specifically is that one of those, in I think that syntax package, one of those taxes was part of the initiative to get people to use the electronic money here. Right. And so what they're doing is adding a 15% tax on your cell phone, all cell phone and landline services if you pay in regular money. But if you pay in the electronic currency, then that tax doesn't exist for you. And given the fact that CNT owns they own almost, I would be surprised if they had less than 90% of the market share for landlines.
Yeah.
And they've got a decent market share. They're probably one of the smaller ones though in the mobile cell phone service space, but certainly one of the larger players in that space. So it's just interesting that that they would sell that asset, in that would be, those two things would be connected in that way. At least the timing is kind of the same. So interesting to think about.
It's hard to bankrupt a nation that doesn't have its own currency because, there's no debt-based currency to create greater and greater sums of debt, like the U.S. and almost every country in the world that has its own currency. Currency is issued at debt and creates enormous amounts of debt as the money supply increases. But in Ecuador, they use the dollar. So if it takes quite a feat to bankrupt a country when you've got oil up the wazoo, you've got gold up the wazoo, you've got copper, you've got lots of wood, you've got just incredible amount of natural resources, water, silver, right? You have to spend money like Ecuador has over the last 8 years and take on enormous amounts of high interest loans to be able to,
they've more than doubled the size of government from 2006 to 2013.
Right. If you just look at what we've seen in Loja since we got here, the presence of government has tripled? cops, municipal workers, all of it.
Absolutely.
So
at a time when the federal government is cutting, budgets to cities and towns.
So interesting, interesting how that's playing out. Just to get these numbers to you really quick. So the number for the amount of cash you can take out of the country tax-free is now 1,098.
Or 3 months of pay for somebody making minimum wage. I think that's an important baseline to use because, we just need to, sharing is caring.
And this is interesting as well in the context of a referendum that has been approved to allow for Correa's reelection. So they are now allowed to put to popular vote the ability to approve Correa's right to run again, which currently he cannot. So that is also in process as the Supreme Court has, I think it was the Supreme Court, but the court in Ecuador has allowed that referendum to move forward.
But he doesn't want to run.
So he says. Although, well, actually, I just closed that article out because I finished talking about it, but it said in that article, and it was a Bloomberg article, I believe, that he hasn't ruled it out. I know he's made a lot of statements saying he won't run again, but interesting, at least in that article, they say he hasn't ruled it out.
Well, of course, I was being sarcastic.
Yeah. Right. Right.
Yeah, I mean, he's been saying leading up to this point, no, I'm not going to run again, but now that that law is or that referendum is on the table that will pass, then he can say, now he can sort of hedge himself.
Well, I don't know
in that direction.
I mean, it'll be interesting if they put that to popular vote. It'll be interesting to see how that goes. I would be, unless they just use their electronic voting machines and say it won. It wouldn't surprise me at all if that measure lost. So that would be interesting if that happens.
What would be even more interesting is if he ends up winning it somehow, some way through the with the help of advanced technology. On a roll today. If he does that and then rejects it because it's like, I just want to be with my family, so he can sort of like ride off into the sunset and then, come back in 2021 is, my country needs me.
Well, I mean, if you were to stick around and see the results of the policies you've implemented over the last number of years, I mean, you wouldn't do that either. So something.
And he'll come back and campaign on how he's reduced poverty by stealing from one person and giving it to another.
Namely himself. Interesting article.
I digress.
Yeah, interesting article out of the New York Times. Earthquake title is "Earthquake Jolts Ecuador into Enacting Long-Avoided Fiscal Changes." That's just funny the way they frame that. But Puerto Viejo, Ecuador. Even before the earthquake struck, prospects were rough for this tiny Andean nation. Oil prices, which once fueled a government spending bonanza aimed at the poor, had collapsed. The economy was contracting. The only lifeline came from China, whose loans included high interest rates and terms that the government here has not made public. Now, after Ecuador's largest earthquake since 1979, the country's leftist leaders are turning to the kinds of measures they rose to power railing against. On Wednesday, President Rafael Correa delivered the news on television. There would be an increase of 2 percentage points in the sales tax, that's the VAT, the value-added tax, a one-time garnishing of government wages for those earning more than $1,000 a month.
Oh, just government wages?
Yeah, I thought it was, well, he certainly proposed it for everybody. I don't know. Let me see the date of this article. This is from the 23rd. So this is all, this is, no, I believe it was everybody. Unless we both missed that, but I think it was everybody as well.
Yeah, because I would say that I was thinking to myself that, percentage-wise, it's probably 80% of government workers who are the people who make up that group.
Kind of money. Yeah. Just to, jump off on a tangent there real quick. That is just the divide that Correa is creating in Ecuador between those working for government and those not is really amazing to see. Minimum wage in Ecuador is $365 a month. They then take taxes out of that check, so you can subtract 30 or 40 or so a month from that for your take-home wages. That's how much you get as, I don't know, maybe 80% of the private sector working makes that or less off the books. Government, people who work for government in any capacity make good money for Ecuador. I'm talking 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 times the number that the private sector can bear. So, and at the same time, those jobs have been increasing for years now. So the government buildings in Ecuador are the nicest buildings in Ecuador. The government's cars are the nicest cars in Ecuador. The cops get new uniforms all the time. The cops make a lot of money. The military, they've they've got to fight, those crazy nations like Peru. The government makes a lot of money. And
they lost 3 wars to, by the way.
Right, they did.
In over half of their country.
right. But I mean, at this point, the chances of a military skirmish in Ecuador are zero. But those guys
already took what they wanted.
Those guys are making a lot of money, and that's true across the board. If you work for the government, you make decent money. If you don't work for the government, you don't. Basically, I mean, maybe I'm exaggerating slightly, but that's the dividing line. Yeah. So
once you work for a big successful company,
and you're high up in
it,
yeah. So what does that mean? That means that cops and the military and the municipio and all these paper pushers are going to do what they can to protect their space, their lot in life, which Correa has given them, if you want to put it that way. So, if me and Darnell were looking for a secretary, we would be able to put an ad out and interview 300 people tomorrow for minimum wage, no problem, because that's what the market can bear in this, semi-socialist nation, which has been, sort of choking out business with taxes and regulations. If that same person could get a job working for the mayor at some level, which there's hundreds of thousands of those jobs, they would make 3-4 times that amount, or certainly, minimum 2 times that amount. Yeah. And if they were a little higher up, 3 or 4. So that's sort of the dichotomy, and it's a little scary. The way that split has sort of taken place. I mean, the cops support the president. The military supports the president. Well, of course they do. He's stolen everyone else's money and given it to them. So that's, just interesting that way. You take like the guy who has, 2,000 square meter lot, which he's got, a cow and some chickens and a little crappy house. His taxes are going up. His fees are going up. Every aspect of his life is getting harder because of government actions. And yet, cop salaries are going up, military, municipal workers, etc. They're being hired. Their salaries are increasing. Interesting dynamic there. That's sort of unfolding here. A little scary from my perspective. But I digress. Getting back to this article, he was talking about the $1,000 a month, the tax for those making more than $1,000 a month. In recent days, he has spoken about asking the international community for loans, ones likely to come with their own difficult conditions. And his opponents are talking about the possibility of approaching the IMF. This subsequently happened, long shunned here for its demands to cut government spending. The deficit, the lack of savings, and now an earthquake have made it clear the old way of doing things simply can't continue in Ecuador, said Jose Hidalgo, an economist who directs the Corporation for Development Studies, a research institute in Quito, the capital. The Ecuador has become the latest country in the region where falling commodity prices have joined with other circumstances in pressuring leaders to renege on populist promises of the last decade. In oil-producing Venezuela this year, President Nicolas Maduro ordered gas stations to begin charging a nominal rate for the first time. And I'll skip some of this. In Ecuador, a 7.8 magnitude earthquake a week ago helped set off what many say was a debate years in the making. Over the last decade, the government made significant investments in infrastructure and education while depleting emergency funds set aside for disasters like earthquakes, analysts say. Spending on government salaries also ballooned as the government grew. There you go. Mr. Correa said the bill for reconstruction would be more than $3 billion, a sum he said the government did not have. The government is using the earthquake as an excuse to introduce measures it had needed to introduce for a long time, said Francisco Rodriguez, the chief Andean economist at the Bank of America Merrill Lynch. The news did not go over well in Puerto Viejo, the largest city, and this is an important point, hit by the earthquake, where the death toll has passed 100 people. More than 600 have died throughout the country. Roberto Rodriguez, a former congressman who lives in the city, said raising taxes after a natural disaster would only make the reconstruction effort more costly for residents. The price of everything will simply go up. Concrete, asphalt, any construction material you can imagine, he said. There need to be incentives to build at a time like this. Evelyn Poggi, the owner of a warehouse in Puerto Viejo, said taxes had already been too high for her business before the earthquake, and Ecuador's economic contractions felt even more profoundly in provincial cities like Puerto Viejo had given her business a beating. So, again, the Times nails it, strangely enough.
Yeah, and you're talking about the New York Times. I just felt that point should be emphasized.
So Darnell's cracking himself up. So interesting stuff. As far as the earthquake, we've got taxes going up as a result. I don't know. Do we want to get into Venezuela real quick? Do you have other stuff you want to touch on the earthquake?
No, that was it about the earthquake.
Okay. So, you want to look at, the results of socialist government, look no further than Venezuela. There's an article out of Pan Am Post, looting on the rise as Venezuela runs out of food, electricity. And I won't even read the article, like the headline says it all. But that is what's happening right now in Venezuela. They've also, we talked about that last week. I won't hit on that. But funniest headline maybe in the history of political headlines. Out of Bloomberg, Venezuela does not have enough money to pay for its money. And when I read that, I said, holy shit, are they talking about debt-based money? Like, what? Before I read the article, I thought, are they talking about like they can't pay the interest on the debt for printing money? But no, they meant it literally. Ecuador, and this is a hilarious article. I encourage all of you to Google this and read it. Venezuela does not have enough money to pay for its money. It's out of Bloomberg. They mean it literally. They don't have enough money to pay the companies who are producing the physical currency that they use in Venezuela. They can't pay the bill for the companies to produce enough currency to keep up with the inflation that they've created in Venezuela. So that is hilarious, sad, and exceptional.
That reads like a headline from The Onion.
It's like from The Onion, yeah.
I just pulled up The Onion just to compare it.
Yeah.
Here's a funny one. EPA urges Flint residents to stop dumping tap water down the drain.
Oh, geez. Which, by the way, they've started killing people in Flint. If people involved in the lawsuits, I don't have any of that stuff in front of me because I didn't think we were going to talk about that. But the people who maybe testify or are bringing lawsuits are now, showing up dead in Flint, Michigan.
Yeah, that might be the only thing worse than living in Flint, Michigan.
So I know you wanted to jump into some stuff about adjusting to life in Ecuador. We got a few minutes left. I don't know. Should I get in the mission creep, or should we just do that and call it a day?
Yeah, I think I'd like to kind of end on a positive note here.
Yeah, go for it.
Because I think that, we joke a lot about these kinds of things going on in the world. And I think that's really, comes from a good place in the sense that, I know I can speak for you in this case that we just love living in Ecuador. And there's just so much good about Ecuador, so many things that attracted, both of us here that, we continue to love about it. And I think it would be reasonable to say that we've both come to appreciate those things more in a lot of ways. And so some of these policies that you see happening, I think, are just ruining the country and taking away a lot of the really good things. Not to say that, thinking about leaving or anything as a result of this. It's really just, I think, therapeutic in a certain sense. And then also from another perspective, just wanting to inform people about what's going on in the world, because a lot of the things that are happening here in Ecuador are happening all over. And I think Ecuador, in the way that it's happening here, is a really good context for what's happening in other places. because I think it's happening in a way in other places, particularly the United States, in a way that's more hidden or more covert. And here it's really out in the open, and much easier to analyze and to observe and to talk about.
I mean, and Ecuador had a long way to catch up. I mean, part of the reason we don't live in the States is because of all this stuff we're talking about. And this stuff is much more heavily implemented there, and much more easily implemented there, and much more accepted, I would say, by, there's much less resistance. So, I mean, if we did a show on the U.S., it would be much more negative than, and I don't like that word negative. I mean, I don't actually think any of this is negative. It's just more,
Accurate?
Yeah. And, I mean, both of us are very optimistic. And as you said, I'll give you a quick anecdote in terms of life here. And I actually wrote a blog about this. It'll come out next week, I believe. I'll probably publish it next week. But I had a friend who had another friend who wanted me to see a property. And when the guy came by my office and we sat down and we talked, and as it turned out, the property was like an hour and a half on foot. So I begrudgingly agreed to go see it with him. It was one of the coolest days I've had in a couple of months. I mean, here I am on horseback in the Ecuadorian Andes, surrounded by the most lush, green, vibrant nature you can possibly imagine, riding up into the mountains, eating wild fruit all along the way, drinking water out of the streams, pleasant, like, misting on us, like, I mean, just you feel so good. You feel so good out on these properties, seeing these properties. Ecuador is just like beyond incredible. I love living here. So yeah, I'm going to give you my opinions about what's going on here politically. I think that's important for people to understand. And a lot of you out there listening to this are probably going, well, hey, I like all these, socialist policies, and that's fine too. And if you're into that stuff, great. We're obviously not, and we're trying to entertain you and give you a good show, and we're going to, give you our opinions on these things. But as far as a place to live, and as far as how I feel living here, and the quality of life and the quality of nature, and the cool thing about the government stuff too is that it's very workable here. It's like, yeah, the national government, even the local governments, does all kind of nonsense, which, every time I read about, like, sticks a knife in my heart. At the same time, then I go to the municipio, which I do 3 or 4 times a week, unfortunately. Especially lately, right? Or really only lately. But, I'm dealing with how these policies are going to be implemented on the ground, and they're always workable. There's always a solution. There's always workable. You can always find someone to help you. You can always figure out how to get done what you're trying to get done. That's also one of my favorite things about Ecuador, because I was coming from dealing with real estate in New York City, and I didn't find that to be the case there. Hardly at all. Dealing with bureaucracy in New York City, if they say wait 6 months, it means wait 6 months. Whereas here, right? Whereas here, wait, I'll have this to you in 2 weeks. Well, a couple of conversations later, and you might have it in 3 days. So, I just to your point, I think that's important to drive home.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that, overall, whether we have the same political ideology or whatever you want to call it with anybody who's listening to the show, I just prefer to focus on what we have in common is, which is an interest in Ecuador. And if you're interested in Ecuador, I think we can be a resource for you, whether it's the real estate tour, the relocation services, or the properties that we have for sale. We're here to give people that perspective that we didn't have when we came here that we really would have benefited from. So with that, I'll roll into a really interesting article that really rang true for me. That I would encourage everybody to read. It's from Cuenca High Life from today as well too, and it's titled "Classes at the Cuenca College for Expats: How Newcomers Pick Friends and Acquaintances Based on Cohort Traits." And it actually touches on a lot of things that we've just come across and talked about. But I really like this article because it talks about it in a really concrete and organized way, and so I'll get into reading it. The large influx of foreigners to Cuenca has turned this small Andean city into a world-class laboratory experiment for a major amenities migration during the past decade. In the early years, it was overwhelmingly retirees from the U.S. and Canada arriving in town. While gringos continue to predominate, today we are seeing a demographic shift towards younger, more European newcomers. A notable phenomenon in the influx, no matter the timing, is how the successive waves of immigrants display certain cohort characteristics. In the same ways, the expatriation movement to Cuenca can be compared to college classes. A class, in this case, constitutes a group of expats who arrive about the same time, face similar challenges together, and form a cohort group that tends to stick together, to the exclusion of other classes that came before or after. Expats arriving in Cuenca 10 to 15 years ago discovered that only a handful of world travelers and adventurers had preceded them. Though newcomers were a fairly tight-knit group by necessity, they hardly could be called a class, although the bartenders at Ruby Red's, Eucalyptus, and Cafecito would probably beg to differ. These circumstances in timing were too random to aggregate into a cohort. Then came what could be called the class of 2007-2008, following the first wave of Cuenca media attention. Although somewhat small, also somewhat small, this group had a few things in common. They arrived around the same time. They were fed up with a failing economy in North America, the threat of inflation in the political circus, the U.S. presidential election, in parentheses, yes, history does repeat itself, and the erosion of personal liberties. They were also looking for something more out of life, although the goal was vague. This class included more investors and was more inclined to buy their housing than rent, unlike later classes. And we've talked about this group specifically in our experience, having dealt with, some of the people who are now selling properties at this point. I would put those that British couple from the coast in that category. I would put those people who sold that property in San Joaquin in that category. And so those people, some of those people are sticking around, some of those people are leaving, but you can certainly, those would be my impressions of those people just from interacting with them. Then they move on. The class of 2010-2011, by contrast, consisted of more strategic defaulters, bailing on their mortgages and credit card debt, shipping down their possessions, and setting up upscale apartments and condos.
This reminds me of the sex tourists from the last article like this you got into. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
So are you saying that the sex tourists are also serial defaulters?
I don't know. That's to be determined. But but funny. You both are funny.
Yeah. I mean, I find it funny because it's accurate. Like, it's just like it hits the nail on the head. Although
I've never come across any sex tourists down here. Have you?
I did.
Really?
I did. No, and the funny thing about it was just funny how I came into knowing that, because it was from two different people.
Did he grunt at a 6-year-old on the street? Was that how you came to know about it?
No. But I mean, if he did, I wouldn't have surprised me.
Mm.
Here's
That's
what
unfortunate.
Yeah. So, and I mean, but here's what it was. It was a client of ours who's not that way at all, but is kind of a weirdo. And he was telling me.
Called one of our clients a weirdo on air, huh?
Well, we shoot from the hip here in the Ecuador Insider podcast. I'm just telling the truth. Anyway, so he's telling me about how he had visited all these different countries and he had visited Costa Rica. And what really turned him off about it is that lots of the people there were sex tourists, who were there, really? Older guys looking for young girls. And this surprised me. I didn't know anything about this.
It's like an actual thing.
It's like an actual thing. So this is the first time.
Right.
And then, I met a group of guys who came into town just randomly on the street, and I had beers with them, and they were in town from Costa Rica, and they were definitely sex tourists. Like, I mean, they talked about it, and they were like telling me, like, they were like telling me about it, and it was like, Oh, I was like, oh, this is a thing. This is the thing the guy was talking about.
Wow. So not only are they sex tourists, but like they get together and like come here as a group of sex tourists. Like they admit to each other that they're sex tourists and like come here and talk about it. That's mildly upsetting.
So that was like my experience with, quote unquote sex tourism. Like, and it doesn't.
Well, prostitution's legal in Ecuador.
Yeah, right. And it doesn't necessarily have to be like underage girls. It's just like,
no, right. That's just kind of what you think of.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
No, right. Sure.
We are in Latin America.
No, they can be 18.
Yeah. That's illegal.
Actually, I think here it's what is that? Actually, I don't know. Might be right.
Moving on. This is funny, though. Yeah, credit cards, shipping down their possessions and setting up upscale apartments and condos. Although these expats tended to buy as often as they rented, they did, to a generalized extent, establish a trend of expatriating for economic reasons. Again, there are plenty of exceptions, but the class of 2012-2013 was more a wave of economic refugees. Many left their home countries with a small nest egg, if any, and were focused on renting and living inexpensively. This class, as Cuenca expat movements matured, also contained a few more hucksters, I don't know what that is, snake oil salesmen, and con men than usual. All part of the fun and color of expat life. It should be added. As we said, the most recent classes of 2014 and 2016 are younger, often with children, and include more Europeans. Its members have most of their lives ahead of them and do not see Cuenca as their final destination. Although they are open to staying, they tend to be more entrepreneurial than earlier classes and to seek out nightlife and adventure sports. After a few years, the cohort classes tend to break apart. Some people leave Cuenca for a new expat destination or return to their home country. Others integrate more fully into the broader expat community. Some forsake the gringos in favor of Ecuadorians, especially single men and women who hook up with locals, in parentheses, and assimilate into their families and networks. Original friends have longer and deeper connection, of course, but most people's horizons widen, including earlier and later classes and Ecuadorians. Again, these are general observations that seem to gel into a somewhat coherent comparison over time. The reasons for expatriating are rarely quite so cut and dry and can, in addition to those cited above, include work, quality of life, ability to retire, cultural exchange, climate, marriage, volunteering, a jumping off point for further travel and expat experiences, learning Spanish, teaching English, affordable health care, friendly people, the ability to get around without a car, Christian ministry, God's call, healthier food, and a healthier lifestyle. What is your reason, and do you think the college classes of expat theory is accurate? This article is revised from a book, Life in Cuenca.
Do you know who wrote that book?
It is by Dake Castleman and David Murill.
Okay. Not the one I was thinking of, but I find that to be very accurate.
Yeah. And that's why I wanted to share it. It's it really rang true for me, and really brought up some observations that I maybe crossed my mind, but I hadn't really taken stock of them in that way. So should we leave it there? Anything to add?
No.
Okay, great. Well, again, everybody, thanks for joining us on the 19th episode of the Ecuador Insider Podcast. Again, we are a real estate and relocation services firm based in Loja, Ecuador. You can reach us toll-free at 888-999-0948 via email at info@abecuador.com. That's A as in Apple, B as in boy, Ecuador.com. Of course, you can find our blogs, our podcast, or information about properties at our website. That's www.abecuador.com. And you can find out more information about our real estate tour or our relocation services by going to abectour.com for the real estate tour and ecrelocation.com for the relocation services. Again, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week.